Now that we have our armature firmly established and anchored in place with our 5-minute epoxy, we can actually start sculpting the darn thing. The kind of clay that I'm going to use is called Chavant NSP Medium. Chavant brand, non-sulfur plasticine, medium grade. You'll notice that I use a convection oven to heat the clay in. It normally is quite firm, so by heating it up just a little bit, you can get a very nice head start on the work. And roughing it in goes very, very quickly, which of course I like. You'll notice that as I establish the sculpture, I started off fairly thin. I don't just block a lot of clay on there at once. I start off fairly thin. One of the first major parts that I establish is the rib cage. Even though this character is wearing pants, I like to establish the general shape of the muscles underneath. So I am laying in some calf muscles here, very generally. I'm not going for an extremely specific shape or the exact insertion of the muscle, just the overall form, so that as I work it, once I get the pants going, there will be a nice believability to the understructure of what's going on underneath. Also, during this period, when I'm sculpting the legs, I sometimes bend the arms out of the way like this just to kind of make room and so that I don't get scratched by the sharp wire. So now I'm just kind of establishing the button here. And all this will make sense even when I sculpt the clothing over it. I'm going to get the backs of the thighs in here. Just kind of trying to get the general girth of the leg accurate. Okay. Let's get that rib cage established in there a little more. Now, the actor was very, very thin at this point in his career. So I don't want to bulk it out so much that it starts feeling heavily muscular. It should still feel fairly slim and youthful. I strongly suggest that you use anatomy books if you're a beginning sculptor. As I said before, you know, I've done this so many times that it sort of comes naturally to me. I know anatomy well enough that I can kind of just go for it. But if you are new to sculpting or you're unsure of where muscles lay, where they insert, what their proportions are, I strongly suggest that you use reference books on anatomy, get photographs of real people. You might even hire a model. So I am continuing to sort of just get my proportions right. I'm going to start moving into the shoulder area more. Okay, see how that's coming in there? I'm slowly building up all the forms and the shapes. I'm not just rushing in and throwing a bunch of clay in the armature. I want to make sure that I'm maintaining my proportions. So going slower is good for that. So I'm still getting the proportions in here. I'm getting the rib cage completely established now. So when I'm sculpting, I like to use a very harsh overhead light that allows me to see the forms very, very clearly. It helps me to understand the dimension of the piece, and it helps me to establish as dramatic a feel to the forms as I can get. You'll see that what I do is I actually take a glob of clay, make a worm out of it when I'm sculpting the limbs, and squeeze it over the armature wire so that it really bonds to the armature. One of the issues that I see in a lot of the new digital art that's being created on ZBrush and Mudbox and programs like that, with those that have not established a background in the traditional media, is that there tends to be a lack of understanding of how to establish a really strong character. I see a lot of people copying other artists to get somewhere kind of quick, you know, and establish some kind of name for themselves on the forums and whatnot, when there needs to be more of a sense of genuine originality, which I see lacking in far too much fantasy art nowadays. For some reason, most of the people that I've seen working in traditional media seem to be able to establish quickly. Now, I'm not sure whether that's partly the fault of the platform itself, you know, actually doing digital art, or whether that is something that is inherent to the artists working in it. I don't know. But there is a homogeneity to the work that I see in ZBrush. It all looks the same. And it seems as if no matter who is doing the artwork, it has a feeling of sameness from artist to artist. Whereas when you're looking at the work of a sculptor, a genuine three-dimensional artist, you can tell immediately who did it. There's a style there. There's something about the way that work looks in simulated 3D as opposed to genuine 3D that always looks the same. And I think that's a problem, you know. I think such a huge part of art in general is establishing a sense of individuality. And if your work doesn't feel individual, then what is the point of creating it? You're not going to stand out by recreating the work of other artists that have come before you. You'll only stand out if you are creating original works that are wholly your own. And that is what I've striven to do since I was first getting into the business, was to create a look that was my own, to have a feeling to my work that was unique, and hopefully I've achieved that. So you'll see that my knowledge of anatomy comes into play, especially in the upper body, because his upper body is what's exposed. You'll see a great deal of attention as I'm going through this process, paid to insertion of muscles, proportion of muscles. You know, we've got deltoid, bicep, tricep, infraspinatus, the shoulder blades, of course, the torso area. I'm going to establish some serratus anterior in here, which are these blade-like shapes that look serrated, hence its name. And the serratus anterior, a little trick to give you, the serratus anterior are on a diagonal. If you look at the nipples being here, if you look at this as a V, the serratus are going to be on that continuing diagonal down this way. Okay? That is a rule. I see a lot of people who sculpt the serratus anterior and they get the placement wrong. It's very important to me. It's one of the coolest parts of anatomy, and so it's very important to get the placement of that just right. See that? This is roughly 6th scale that I'm working in. And it's interesting, sculptors work in a variety of scales, of course, but when doing maquettes, it seems as if sculptors all have different scales that they're comfortable with, that they almost automatically create in. And the one that I automatically seem to create in again and again is 6th scale, which means that if 6 of these were laid end to end, it would equal 1 full-size human being. I'm not 100% sure why I'm attracted to 6th scale. I think that it has something to do with a lifelong interest in miniatures. And I just think that it's a very controllable scale. There's something about being able to establish things so quickly in this scale as opposed to 3rd scale, or I know some people that work in almost half scale, when doing maquettes. But I don't know, it's strange because it's sort of an automatic scale that I end up creating in almost every time.